Right, well, so when I saw the glasses, I thought we've got Professor John today, and all of a sudden, then the technology doesn't work, and I'm thinking maybe I want old John back because he wouldn't have had this issue.
Professor John's pretty unreliable.
Okay.
I have my guitar just in case.
Okay. Well, no, that'll be good.
It'd be nice to get better sound, but if this is fine, it's fine.
Yeah, no, this is good. I mean, I think this, well, thanks for joining in. I mean, it's amazing that there's been so much going on around the world that it's good to have a forum to just discuss parts of that. But yeah. I always don't want to go straight into the meat. You know, we like to delve into the sort of the appetizers, stuff like that. So it'd be good to just get a sense from your background, from the musical side. You know, I've introduced basically that you're born in San Fran, but just to get a picture from where yourself, your upbringing and stuff, because I guess later on when we talk about other issues, it will kind of sort of make sense where your feelings are on certain things, and then we can talk about the musical journey and stuff, and then we can move in. So yeah, do you want to start off then?
Yeah, so I was born in the San Francisco Bay Area in California in the early 70s, so when America was a much more liberal place generally. The area I'm from, George Bush, the younger, referred to as the Den of the Viper. And so whenever there was sort of political activity and it was, George, do you want to go to San Francisco? No, I never wanted to go to San Francisco. I was raised in a very politically active family. My dad had grown up in a very conservative family in San Francisco. My mom had grown up in quite a liberal family in just outside Boston. And so my dad had kind of rejected his conservative upbringing and more or less joined forces with my mom. And so I grew up in a house where politics was talked about all the time. Okay. I was probably, I guess I was 7 the first time I was stood outside shops with a clipboard with a petition, getting people to sign things to call, for the latest political cause. So I grew up in a town called Pleasant Hill, which is pleasant. And my mom at various points had been the campaign manager for majorities of the city council. So she was always behind the scenes, but was very, very actively involved in both schools and local politics. A lot of that's about planning and that sort of stuff. So it was that sort of flavor. Towards the end of her life, she got involved a bit more in state politics. But literally every day we would eat dinner and watch the news. And my parents would shout at the television. and that was my upbringing. It was the most natural thing in the world to be interested in politics, to be active in politics. And my dad was an historian, and kind of strange. He was an art historian and a military historian. Okay. So kind of a strange combination. And so there was always that sense of a broader context to everything. So whatever we were talking about, it was, you got to know the history behind that in order to have a real sense of why things are, because everything is the product of, decades or centuries of history. Yeah. Musically, very very sort of, again, going back to my parents, very divided. My dad was a man of cliches, and one of his favorite cliches was, there was a time in my life when Wagner was very important to me. which kind of sums up my dad. He was very old school. So my dad was born in 1929, start of the Great Depression, grew up really before and during the war. His brother served in the Pacific. So that was what defined him. My mom was 10 years younger and therefore really grew up after the war. And so when you think about Americana and, Chevys and jukeboxes, that's the world my mom grew up in. So they were very different musical heritages. So growing up, I was very much allied with my mom, who was a massive Beatles fan, who liked a lot of the music from the early 60s folk revival, who like ELO and ABBA and Fleetwood Mac, and it kind of, it didn't go that much further than that. There was this period where I don't know. I guess it's that thing where you start to feel alienated from the musical culture, and I think the '80s, my mom kind of switched off a bit.
Okay.
So my childhood music was literally sat in front of the record player when there were record players with the proper album, staring at the album pictures, looking through all the stuff, listening hugely to the Beatles, and also a comedy singer named Tom Lehrer, who was from Boston, and so my mum had been introduced to him when she was a teenager, and he sang kind of naughty pseudo-political songs, but naughty in a sort of a 50s, early 60s kind of way. So, kind of poking fun at things rather than over the top. No swearing, none of that.
Okay.
But kind of, subversive. So those were kind of interesting things to have, because the Beatles were actually subversive in a lot of ways. If you watch them interviewed, they were always thinking of themselves as those kids from the place that, kind of the have-nots. And, there's that great thing at the Royal Variety Show where John Lennon is in front of the crowd and he says, okay, so when we finish, if the people in the front would clap, and if the people in the back, just rattle your jewelry. and so I think I always had that sense that music could be fun, and music had a lot of different levels to it. So it had a societal function, and it had a pure music function, and the lyrics could tell all kinds of different stories. That's me. That's my background.
But then, it's interesting because the Beatles, I was born in Liverpool, and they came from a sort of poor background. So you do wonder how they were able to, the way it seemed very intellect to say certain things like that, and even with their music, be able to communicate to the conservative, not a conservative, but an elitist group without being sort of very direct with it. And you do wonder how they were able to combine that, instead of, because some musicians would be very much down with the establishment and stuff like that, but they were able to say it, but very softly, so you couldn't tell if they were joking. And if you, almost like a parable, if you don't know it, you kind of say, were they insulting us or were they trolling us? We don't know it. And it's funny, in the rattle the jewelry moment, you do think, I wish I had a close-up on everyone's face. Because it's almost like, are they,
what?
But in being in California, that's San Francisco, but in the California, that seems very much, if I think of that time in the 60s, 70s, I think Woodstock, and I think that type of hippie music, because San Francisco and the Bay Area has always seemed to be a sort of a world of its own outside of, even in California, because I worked in LA and stuff, but it seems a different scene all the time.
So I'm the product of a series of broken families. So my dad was married previously, and my mum was married previously. So my oldest sister is 22 years older than me. So in 1967, 1968, my sister was 17, 18 years old, was a hippie, was in the Haight-Ashbury, was going to the Fillmore, was doing drugs, was getting in trouble with the police, was bringing very strange people home. And so I was raised not like a lot of my peers who were raised by that generation. I was raised by the older generation who really thought, ooh, hippies really kind of messed things up. Which is funny because a lot of that music I absolutely grew up with, but I didn't grow up with that kind of ethos of the hippie dream of the 60s being a really positive thing. I was raised much more with a sense of, there was some really great ideas, but a lot of it went awfully wrong.
So then your interest into actually playing, so from, I can understand that, so we've got, at one point, we've got the politically activism, and I can imagine how that would affect if you were a songwriter writing lyrics. But then what about actually picking up and saying, okay, here I am, let me be a musician? How does that, were you encouraged to do that, or is that stuff you did on your own?
No, I was the non-musician for the longest time.
Okay.
So, we had a piano in the house, and I would fumble around learning really, really basic stuff on the piano, like the one, you know, where you play with your knuckles rather than your fingers.
Okay.
Nothing at all complicated. And then my brother started to learn the piano and really, really took to it very quickly. And there was always kind of an agreement with me and my brother that we wouldn't try to be really good at the same thing at the same time. It was never spoken about, but there was, so when he was doing music, I kind of couldn't do music. And then when he stopped doing music, I immediately started. So he went off to uni to do music, and that was a bit of a train wreck, as some people's, you know, early uni experiences are. But then he stopped doing music essentially, and then I suddenly went, oh, I can jump on this. I had been very much headed in I was going to move to LA and be a screenwriter.
Okay.
And yeah, and then suddenly I had this freedom to do music. And so when I was 17, my mom had a guitar, an old Guild guitar, just over there in the corner, and it was missing the two middle strings. And I was listening to Harry Belafonte live at Carnegie Hall over and over and over again, just loved that. And one day just thought, I wonder if I could work out what's going on. Like, if I picked up this guitar, could I play what is being played on the guitar? And because I was missing the two middle strings, it didn't even occur to me to play chords. And so I could work out the bass line a little bit, and then I could work out the tune on the top strings. And that was essentially my very early guitar playing experience. And I ran into some friends at high school who it turned out were learning guitar. For my 18th birthday, I got the two middle strings.
Okay.
So suddenly I had 6 strings, and a friend of my brother's sat me down and showed me how to do a few things, not asking if I was right or left-handed. Just showed me how to play right-handed. I'm left-handed, but I've learned to play right-handed. And, you know, every now and then I think, gosh, what if I had switched? And even having played for 30 years now, I sometimes think, what if I switched for, would that be easy to pick up, or would it be a total nightmare? And I've never done that.
What are the dreams of being in a band and becoming the next Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles?
Well, I had the great fortune and misfortune to have all of that happen in the very late 80s, when it was all the big hair bands and there was Guns N' Roses and Poison and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was learning a music that, I loved that stuff. I absolutely loved it, but it was very, very different from my roots. And I wasn't really deep down schooled in that. So it always felt a little bit strange. My friend Chris, he wanted to grow a mullet because everyone was growing mullets. And he just wouldn't do it. And finally he said, Chris, I'll grow a mullet and then you can grow one. And then at least you'll say, oh, my friend John's got a mullet too. And so I grew this stupid mullet for, 2 of them. Yeah. So that was, I think one of the things that was difficult about that is a lot of that music was really hard. If you look at what Slash is doing in a lot of Guns N' Roses stuff, it's not the sort of thing you can do after playing for a year. It's really sort of the guitar hero, guitar virtuoso day, and I just couldn't handle that stuff. And so I never threatened too much to get on stage at that point. It was a bit later that I started to do the whole band thing. So I went to uni at a tiny little art institute called California Institute of the Arts, which is, shortened to CalArts, which is one of the strangest places there is, and is magical and wonderful and amazing. And I always felt like a fraud there, because the people there were so spectacularly talented. There was a guy who was the trombonist for No Doubt when I was there, and there were jazz musicians who were just ridiculously good. And so I always felt a bit of an outsider. And interestingly, when I was there, musically where I settled was in a mariachi band, because mariachi music is mostly 3 chords. Every now and then you get a 4th chord in there. And it's all fairly simple. And I was dropped in the mariachi band. My suite mate who lived in the room next door, Marco, he found me one day and said, "Do you want to be in this mariachi band?" I said, yeah, sounds great. Okay, we're playing in 2 days. You need to learn 28 songs. Oh my gosh, okay.
Is it 3 people in the band? The 3 people in the mariachi, or is it more than 3?
Oh, so with this was what did we have? I ended up for that one. I played guitar. Marco played guitar. Julissa played the violin. Alex, her husband, played the guitarron, which is the big, ginormous swap bass.
And no trumpeter.
No, we didn't have a trumpet. Julissa, the violinist, would double on mandolin.
Okay.
We never had. I mean, it was kind of funny. We ended up being a not overly mariachi sort of mariachi band. We ended up calling ourselves a folklorico band, which is a bit more flexible. But so that was a real kind of crash course in just gigging a lot. So it was literally just learn a bunch of tunes, go out and play them, and get paid in burritos and. Just, okay. It wasn't. There was no dream of the scout, the record A&R guy out there going, oh, that's going to be the next big mariachi band. So it was in a genre where there was no real, massive financial future. So that was actually quite good. I learned a lot about what is important to be about music. You can have 3 chords, you can sing in a foreign language. And it's that thing where the wonder of music isn't compatible with words, and that's something that was really introduced to me there that I've carried through in all the music I've done since then. That the joy we get out of music is beyond language, and I think that's so important.
So, I mean, I think that's quite interesting, knowing that you came from sort of a political family where I'm sure either they were the left or the right, they were in one direction, and politics in America is very, very much you're in one camp or the other, so there's quite a division. Yeah. But then now you're learning about music, which seems to be very unifying. So I wonder, was there conflict between your views?
Okay. At that point, so when I was at Cal Arts, that was probably my introduction to you're not as left-wing as you thought you were. Because Cal Arts was, so I went to Cal Arts in the mid-90s, post-modernity, and everybody's reality perspective is totally individual, was kind of a new thing intellectually for a lot of people, and certainly for, the 18 to 25-year-olds mostly who were there. And so that sense of individual liberty was really different than I grew up with. I grew up in a, my parents were older, so there was a kind of social conservatism there that still really existed. My mom would always tell stories about when she was young, when you went into Boston, you wore gloves. And that was just part of life. There were so many codes of conduct to how you were supposed to behave. To this day, I can't be inside and wear a hat. I have to take a hat off because I was just raised with that kind of old-fashioned sense of this is how things are done. And so then, then to go to Cal Arts where it's you're violently attacking every single, sort of norm that society revolves around. The first day I arrived, my original roommate was a guy named Matthias Schubert, who was from Hildesheim, Germany. And I walked in carrying whatever bag I had, and my mom and dad were with me. And Matthias said, "Do you think it is right that people should swim naked in the pool?" Literally the first words out of his mouth. And my mom was never shy. She would just, say whatever. She went, "I don't know, I've never thought about that." And, so Matthias waves us over and we look out the window and sure enough, there are all these people swimming naked in the pool, which was was kind of a rite of passage. I literally never saw those people swim naked in the pool other than the first week of every year.
Okay.
Because they kind of say, welcome to Cal Arts, we're crazy. So no real, I didn't really have a lot of run-ins with many conservatives until after that. My mum, being political and trying to build bridges, had friends who were conservatives, but there was never that. I mean, it was just so different then. You didn't have the divide. It seemed huge. When Reagan came in, people thought, this is America being ripped apart. And now everybody looks back at Reagan as this great compromiser. And, he used to have drinks with Tip O'Neill, and weren't those the days? And, in 1982, everybody was going, this is the end of the world. So
Star Wars, yeah.
That weird thing, we constantly in coronavirus land talk about the new normal. And I think we take for granted the fact that it's always new normal. Wherever we are, wherever we shift to, totally distorts our perspectives. I have very, very, very conservative family members who are real Trump supporters who, say Bill Clinton was a socialist. And when Bill Clinton came in, he was the most right-wing Democratic president that America had had in a really, really long time. And I think, if he's the far left, then what are you going to do when actual far left people come along?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we'll move to the politics side, but then from the Cal Arts and doing that. So because I've known you, I know that Jimi Hendrix is one of the people that you really, really admire and stuff. And I was wondering, how did he pop in, and did you then think maybe I could get as close to that, or was that stuff did you think when you were in school, I'm going to try and get a career in this music?
I didn't run into Jimi Hendrix until I was probably 18 or 19. And in America, as you'll know, but some people watching won't, university is very different. So in the beginning of university, you can go to what's called a community college, where you do the first half of a university degree. And I did that. Okay. And I ran into a bunch of really much more musically knowledgeable people than me. And so I was there going, Slash, Guns N' Roses. And they were saying, oh, you know about this, and you know about this, and you know about this. And I was going, no. And just, open my eyes to so many things. I think I've always been really fortunate in life to be surrounded by people who are wiser and more experienced than me. And so that's the first time I ran into Hendrix. And I mean, one of the first times I heard Hendrix was actually in an electric guitar class with people playing Hendrix and going, oh my gosh, what's that? I brought my guitar, I will play. So in Foxy Lady and Purple Haze, he plays a chord in different positions, but that chord, which is horrendous, and it's got these two notes in it that sound horrible together, but all together, it has this really distinct sound, and that's come down historically as the Jimmy chord. And so if you talk to musicians, they'll say, oh, it's an E Jimmy chord, or it's an A Jimmy chord. And unless you're a jazzer, then you very, properly say, no, it's a 7 chord with a sharp 6 to add 2. But the thing about Hendrix is there's so many moments where you go, what was that? Where you're just blown away, and you kind of have to stop and say, something just happened there. Like, that sound. You think, I haven't heard that before. I've heard, that's nothing you encountered in Guns N' Roses or, certainly ELO and ABBA. And it just makes you go, what's going on? And, there's a lot of famous episodes from the 60s when, John Lennon came in to the Beatles and said, you got to listen to this, and he's going, and it's Hey Joe, and they're going, what's going on? And for whatever reason, I was able to have that. I was able to kind of have that unbelievable, oh my gosh, what's that, with Hendrix. Okay. in a way that probably was a little bit like people had in the 60s, where it, you know, we live in a culture where it can be hard to be surprised because we're so exposed to so many things. To have something come along, you think, whoa, what's that? One, it's difficult to happen because of our exposure to things. And two, we just live in a much more cynical culture where if you do something amazing, there's this expectation of, oh yeah, that's fine, whatever. And I think I was naive enough that when I first ran into Hendrix, it was fresh. And I had that totally blown away thing. I never, ever, ever, ever thought I'll be able to play that. And it was actually at Cal Arts where I was studying with an amazing guitar teacher named Miroslav Tadic. And I went in, it was actually, I ended up doing Hendrix on accident because there was another guitarist named Danny Gatton, who was an amazing guitarist who had really, really recently committed suicide. And I went to Miroslav. It was amazing. He was, you know, an incredible guitarist. And I said, I want to learn how to play this song by Danny Gatton. And he said, no. I'm not teaching you that. He's too good. Wow. And I went, oh, well, how about Hendrix? You know, and he's, oh, Hendrix, that's fine. That's fine. Danny Gatton, not a chance, but Hendrix, you know.
But what was he trying to do by then? Because if people say Jimmy's one of the best ever, why would he then think, well, it's easier to do Jimmy than to do Danny?
There's a funny thing which I don't think I understood at the time. I befriended a guitarist when I was at Cal Arts named Andre LaFosse, and he played me music by a woman named Ani DeFranco. And he said, I don't know what she's doing. Listen to this. And he played me a song called Egos Like Hairdos. And we listened to it. And we were the same age. He was, you know, much further down the guitar playing road than I was. And I just, you know, shook my head and said, no, I don't have a clue what's going on. And I think the thing with Hendrix is he's so grounded in the blues. And his vernacular is so much from the history of where all guitarists come from. That when you listen to him, you might think, I can't do that. But you do think, I pretty much know what he's doing.
Okay.
Where Danny Gatton would do things you just think, I need to see that. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And Andre Franco, same sort of thing, where you just think, I can't picture that.
So is it a case where there's one thing to learn how to play an instrument, but there's another thing to then, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's almost as if you're finding the sound yourself and just in a way letting it go through you, because you listen to people like whatever Slash or it's Jimmy, they can play the guitar, but when they come out with a chord or a riff, it seems as if that stuff that a sound came through and they're just like, well, I need to play this. It isn't that they're reading sort of like Beethoven has written down the notes and they're like, okay, this is what I have to do. And then they're playing it in a more stylish way. Does it seem as if the more creative you are, the more you don't get limited by the boundaries of what you're supposed to do as a musician, or what's your take?
I think it's a combination. I think one is what musicians call woodshedding. It's literally just putting in the time so that there's less communication internally, where, you know, if I'm playing in particular keys even, I have things, you know, that I know work. So if I'm playing in these top two strings on the guitar are the notes B and E, and in the key of A, you know you've got all these notes, and it's all going to sound good. I've done it a lot, and I know it's okay. And you kind of get this sound it's a bit less firm than if you're just sort of playing sort of what we call closed chords, and triads, just the basic 3 notes. If you're adding other notes, in the key of A, I can do that because I know that works. If I was in the key of G and I had to do that, I'd have to think, ooh, how does that work in G? I know different tricks for G, and I know different tricks for, different keys, and I know different tricks in different positions. So, everybody who does the blues knows those kind of Hey Joe slides, which, if you listen to Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, they're all over that. If you listen to Tears in Heaven, Eric Clapton's just moved them a bit.
Okay.
It's where you get such facility that rather than the guitar being it's kind of a bunch of locked patterns, the whole thing suddenly opens up and you can see everything everywhere, and you know the implications of everything everywhere. And that's the essential journey that any guitarist is on. And I play a number of different instruments, and it exists in different ways for those instruments. The guitar is the one I certainly know the best in that way. So you have to have that facility where when you come to decision, I want to play thing X, that you've got all the tools, and that's just going to happen. The other thing you need is just bravery.
Yeah.
It's just that thing of, in that moment, making a decision and saying, I'm going to do this. and I think that's where you're playing on the edge. And I really think you can tell the difference between listening to someone who's very much in their comfort zone and listening to someone who's thinking, I'm not really sure about this. Eddie Van Halen described a guitar solo as falling down the stairs and landing on your feet. And I think that's a really good analogy because it has that sense of, I don't know what's happening. I was in a punk band before I moved to England called Fracas. Kind of a disappointing name because in England it's fracas, which has no punk vibe at all. And punk songs are all pretty simple, essentially. It was the closest thing to being in a mariachi band, actually, because it's basically 3 chords and just enjoy, music for music's sake. But I would be sitting there in the punk band and I'd be playing the solo and I'd think, oh, I'll do a whole tone thing and see how that sounds. So, suddenly I'm going, and, the audience is going, because it's punk. And there's a freedom to that where, if I was playing a pop song and did a whole tone solo, they'd be going, that sounds really ugly. And so it was an easy environment to be brave in, where sometimes you can get a bit wrapped up in, it's supposed to sound like this or it's supposed to sound like that. And I'm sure there are no great moments in music that don't involve breaking the rules.
I think just as we wrap up on the music side, what's the relationship between the lead guitarist and the lead singer? Because you tend to see, the drummers there, the bass, but you'd always see it's either you've got your Axl and Slash in front, or Eddie Van Halen and I can't remember who did, but or even when it's Bon Jovi, you always see the two of them always in front. Like you're the Bono and the Edge. It's always like the lead guitarist and the lead singer, almost as if we're the front people. Does the lead singer or sometimes the lyricist need the lead guitarist as their mute? I mean, what's that relationship?
What's interesting about that is how much that's changed.
Okay.
So it's much harder to think of current examples of that. So I remember, I think in the 90s, listening to a song and it ended and I thought, there's no guitar solo.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And nowadays, if there's a solo, you think, oh my gosh, there's a solo.
Yeah,
what are they doing? And there's this interesting thing where culturally the guitar gods have fallen. Where, in the 70s and the 80s, it was all about virtuosity and it was all about play as fast as you can. In the 90s, grunge was funny because it was a mix of things. So with kind of the Nirvana style of grunge, which is more punk, it wasn't about that. And if Nirvana had a guitar solo, it was very, very simple. Where then if you look at Pearl Jam, who were much more accomplished, really, technically. That was really the old school, I'm going to just blow your head off with my amazing playing. And it faded after that. And there's all kinds of different theories about that. One of which, a guy named Rick Beato on YouTube talked about a while ago, is that the blues became much less influential in popular music. And he actually credits that with the decline of popular music, that we don't have these global superheroes of rock like we used to. I think from Elvis through certainly grunge, there is the kind of super heroic image of the guitarist.
Yeah.
And so whatever's going on with the lead singer is you also need that guitarist center stage as, you know, essential to the picture. Even, you know, the Smiths, you had Morrissey and you had Johnny Marr. Johnny Marr wasn't a stereotypical guitar god kind of guitarist, but he so drove the sound of the Smiths that he had to be there. He had to be as prominent as Morrissey, which is kind of stunning given, you know, Morrissey's
yeah, I mean, yeah,
spotlight hogging talents.
I mean, I'm a big fan of Coldplay, their performance a lot, and you see that as much as you don't see, apart from Chris being the main guy in the rest, he doesn't need to. I don't even know the name of the guitarist. That's the thing, you know. Before you know Chris and you know who plays the guitar, and those are the main two, the drummer and the bass guitars at the back. But I think what you notice towards the mid to late 90s is that hip hop started to cross over from just being sort of in the black music and black communities and became a lot more mainstream, because the labels saw where we can make a lot more money of this. It's cheaper budgets. We don't have to pay for a massive tour bus. And I think then that sort of influence with auto tunes and more of the studios with just the studio producers. So I think there was a sense where the musician sort of lost it. So you could just be a soloist, you just hire a gig band and it's just you. And yeah, you're not seeing as many bands even having to work without a producer who's doing everything on a laptop and saying, okay, this is what you need to play. So so people are calling back for some traditional music, because there's a lot of one-hit wonders and stuff. Play one track, sell records, sell a record, a single and stuff. Yeah. But so your journey,
how you create authenticity, how you sell to an audience the fact that what you're doing is really heartfelt and is very much where you come from. And I think hip hop had that in spades for such a long time, where you had people who, you know, even when they were super rich, were living really actually difficult lives. You know, you look at the level of violence and deprivation in the lives of hip hop musicians in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you know, they had a lot of songwriting material going on, where, you know, I kind of wonder, did rock get tired? You know, it kind of did its thing, and then what do we say now? And the style started to go out. So, you know, at my school, if you're a 16-year-old boy and you have really long hair and play guitar, you're kind of weird. You're not, you know, and that's fine. You know, I've had a lot of students with long hair who I've, you know, thought were amazing. But for the sort of mainstream population, they look at you and go, you look like you belong in a different decade. That, you know, that sort of thing has disappeared, that kind of fashion.
But the kids now, so as we wrap up, with the kids, what is it that they want, you know, as a you know, teaching a music teacher now with secondary school kids, what is it that they want to play? Are they still influenced by the Bon Jovis or Guns N' Roses, or are they looking, especially the guitarists, are they looking at some of the newer stuff and are they looking to form that type of band? And what's your sense from the kids that are, not that you just teach, that are really passionate about it?
Yeah. Every now and then you get someone who's very rock aware. But for a lot of kids, you know, the sort of grandfatherly figures are bands like My Chemical Romance from the early 2000s, who, you know, were defining new metal, and, you know, Blink 182 and Linkin Park, and these bands that, you know, if you're 47, you think, these guys are new. They've actually been around forever. And, you know, if you're 15, 16, they predate you. And so that's your musical ancestry. But a lot of kids, and in a sense, it's really nice, is they like musicians I've never heard of, who are bedroom musicians who have YouTube channels, or are in Japan or Korea and aren't part of the mainstream. But there's a lot of kids who are just so tuned out from the mainstream. They couldn't tell you anything that was played on Radio 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I find that really refreshing. So I constantly find out about things I'd never heard of.